I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Stop talking.
Please pause. We're going to start the meeting.
Well, I need to have you tell me if you can see my share screen.
Stop talking, please. Okay. Good morning and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for April 16, 2020.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
This is the impacts of sludge, and it's going to be an hour of information. And by way of introductions, I'm John Hutchings, the chair of the board, and to my right is...
I'm Enser, vice chair.
And
Gary Edwards.
Romero Chavez.
And Amy.
And Amy Davis.
Amy Davis, there we go. So do you want to frame this for us and introduce Dr. Honor and...
Yes, and I believe this is Ms. Michelle Hopkins, sorry.
Yes.
Reach out to Commissioner Edwards in a way to introduce Dr. Richard Honor to see if the board would like to hear the perspective related to impacts of the sludge. And this has been an issue, an item you have discussed in the past. There has been a couple of applications as to where that can be utilized. You have taken an affirmative action related to those applications in the past. And again, this is just informational. We do not expect for you to make any decisions today. And at this point, I will probably just leave it up to Dr. Richard Honor to introduce himself for the public to understand your background.
And thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And then continue on with the presentation.
And thank you, Michelle, for bringing this to our attention. Thank you very much. Doctor,
Yes.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, first of all, I need to know if you are able to see my share screen.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, you can. You see the slide with the sludge and the words.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you very much. I just finished another Zoom call and everything was impossible. This is good. Okay. My name is Richard Honor. I have a doctorate from the University of California, Riverside. My specialty during all of my undergraduate and graduate work were environmental sciences, ecology, toxics in the environment, sewage sludge, carcinogens, toxic materials that cause cancer, and with a very strong specialty in infectious diseases of plants and of humans. From that, I went to Antarctica, working for NASA under the auspices of the National Science Foundation through Caltech's Jet Propulsion Lab as part of a NASA project, doing environmental microbiology, environmental safety evaluations in Antarctica for the US government. I then did work for the US Department of Energy, evaluating toxics on Indian lands throughout the Western United States. That was related to drilling for energy resources. And from that, I immediately and illogically began to manage an international program on cancer clinical trials for the development of new therapies for the treatment of children with cancer. I did that for 10 years at the University of Southern California Comprehensive Cancer Center. And during that 10 years, I guess we evaluated 7,500 pediatric cancer patients a year times 10 years. That's about 75,000 infants and children with cancer. And that work I emphasize because it actually imposes quite a powerful emotional impact on anyone working in that field. And I describe it most ridiculously as I get very mad at cancer and things that cause cancer and laws and regulations and industry practices that cause cancer in humans and most especially in children. So that hopefully sets the background for what I do today. After that work at USC in Los Angeles, I moved to Seattle. That was 1983. And I was the president and CEO of a biotechnology company here called Zymo Genetics. I did that for several years, and then I started my own biotech company in DNA probe diagnostics and synthetic oligonucleotide therapeutics for infectious diseases, including for key viral pathogens. I never let go of my interests in environmental sciences and in the toxics in the environment that cause cancer. Right now, I'm in the process of starting yet another new biotechnology company that involves both infectious diseases and cancer. I'm working on a cancer vaccine for a very difficult form of breast cancer. So in the background, I continue to do my environmental work because, as I said, I get very mad at the whole concept of anyone introducing toxic substances into our living environment.
Hey, Doctor,
Yes,
number one, I'm John Hutchings, and I want to thank you very much for doing what you can to kick cancer in the butt. I so applaud that in every way, shape, or form, because it's
Thank
just
you much.
devastated my family. But I want to give you a bit of information I should have given up front. We have a hard stop at 12:30.
Yes.
And we don't want to keep interrupting you, but we'd like to have room at the end for questions and answers, sir. Is all right?
Right. What I did was Michelle will testify, and so will Gary, that I love to do 100 PowerPoint slide presentation with a big audience. So what I did was I shaved it down to 20. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the essence and
Okay.
be very comfortable in telling me to be quiet because I never stop talking, given an audience. So anyway, be comfortable with that. Thank you for that comment. So anyway, I'm going to run through these slides. It'll probably take about 30 minutes, and then we would have 30 minutes for discussion. And also, please feel free to interrupt me during this presentation. If you have questions of the moment, that's fine. The overview of this PowerPoint presentation is toxic waste right here, west of the Cascades in central Washington, mostly in our forests, everything from Thurston County through Pierce County through King County. That's where most of my work is done, but I also have to chase and track the toxic sewage sludge disposal over the mountains in Douglas County, Grant County, Chelan County, Benton County, and mostly in Yakima County, because nearly all of the 150 or 60,000 tons of sewage sludge from King County, for example, is disposed on our food crops in the Yakima Valley. And there's so many toxic compounds in this toxic sewage sludge that no one ever again need ask the question, how do toxins and toxicants get into our food and water sources? It's simple. So anyway, in the first case,
We're on slide 1.
what you're looking at in the background image is a view of Horseheaven Hills over in Benton County. And you're looking at about
Mason?
170,000 tons, a year's supply of King County sewage sludge that they hauled over I-90 and then down through Yakima and up into the Horseheaven Hills in Benton County to store it because some very terrible person has been on the case of King County and the Washington State Department of Ecology. And I pretty much forced them out of dumping all of this sludge into our forests, in the Snoqualmie forests, where it runs into all of our waters and aquifers, and chased them over the hill. And once over there, I started tracking them throughout the Yakima Valley. And if you keep chasing long enough, they get frustrated. And by the way, that pile of sludge you're looking at, that 170,000 or so tons, took about 6,800 double dump truck loads from this side of the hill to that side of the hill. So please imagine the costs of this. And once I got here, they had to move it. So they had to send the 6,800 double dump trucks back and get it and dump it on the crops. And then we ate it. So there you go. So I have to figure out how to change the slide. You may not believe it, but I can't. There we go. So in the background here, this is a typical forest scene in the Snoqualmie forests where King County has been dumping all of their sludge for about 40 years under contract. This happens to be Department of Natural Resources lands. So getting away from the image and into the story, one of the basic underlying tenets that we learned from this work is that wastewater treatment plants do not treat wastewater. Their only function is to separate the water from the solids, return the water to the environment, typically meaning into our rivers and ultimately in the Puget Sound in the Pacific Ocean. And the solids then become some material they have to dispose of. So they make up these enormous stories about its beneficial use and reuse and resource recovery and fertilizer substitutes and so on. And that's how they justify their land disposal of toxic sewage sludge on our food crops. So a lot of very serious research tells us clearly that there are easily tens of thousands. The EPA shows at least 80,000 known toxic chemicals in sewage sludge alone. And if you look at the work done in the EU and the rest and the UK, they get to in excess of 140,000 chemicals. One of the other issues is that when you take that many chemicals and put them in an aqueous environment, they start to recombine and reform to make new toxic chemicals that no one even knows what they are. So that's why we use the terms unknown and unknowable, because the toxics in sewage sludge cannot even be known. There aren't even chemical analytical systems to figure it out. So our agencies, like the Washington State Department of Ecology, as authorized by the US EPA and as effected by, for example, King County Wastewater Treatment Division, all of this unknown toxic material is disposed of on our food crops all throughout Washington, including in our forests. And these are easily identifiable, the known toxins, as those that cause cancer, neurological disorders, various organ dysfunctions, and so on. So it's not a mystery. It's not a big arm wave to say these are toxic chemicals. And when you wonder how they justify doing this kind of behavior, really, it's a matter of science that's never been done. Our key question, our t-shirts always say, what's in it? And when we sit with agencies, which I do, all of them, I meet with them. I just had another meeting with King County Council members, and we go back and forth on who tells you it's okay to say it's safe. Their response is usually, oh, we're in compliance. Well, in compliance with what? Well, with some EPA guidelines. And then when we tell them that these are the chemicals that cause neurological disorders and any of the 100 forms of cancer, they've all been taught to say, you can't prove that. And there's a reason why you can't prove that. And that is, it's against the law to treat healthy people with chemicals and see what kind of diseases they develop. So that's the shaky ground upon which they rest. So what are the motivations? Why would anyone like King County Wastewater Treatment Division get up in the morning and decide to fill hundreds of double dump trucks that day with toxic sewage sludge and haul it over the mountains or into the forests to dispose of it? And they have to make up these terms, and that's why they talk about the likes of beneficial reuse and residuals management. They even have a person who's called the director of residuals management. They refer to it as a fertilizer substitute, and they claim it makes trees grow faster. So DNR is very happy because, you know, DNR has an obligation to generate about $300 million a year from forestry resources for the support of hospitals and prisons and so on. But there is the Pack Forest, not far from where you live, run by the University of Washington. And now, after 25 years of very intense research of treating all kinds of commercial forest trees with sewage sludges, what they've learned is that, as a short sentence, no tree has ever benefited from exposure to sewage sludge. But yet, they still refuse to believe that. That's after 25 years of research. So they call it beneficial resource or reuse and fertilizer substitutes and so on. And the reason they call it a fertilizer substitute, because it's easy to appreciate that in sewage sludge that comes from fecal matter and other kinds of waste, there's lots of nitrogen and potassium and phosphate. These are very important to plants, and there are also many trace elements, metals like copper and so on, that help plant enzymes do the right thing and make plants grow. That's true. But when you weigh that in one hand, the small amount of beneficial reuse, as opposed to the toxicity to human beings and the causal factors of so many diseases, it just doesn't pan out. So what have we done? What are we doing? And I put it in terms of, this is really a public health crisis generated initially by the EPA, then by the state of Washington Department of Ecology, and similarly in other states, and then put to practice every day of our life, for example, as one example, by King County Wastewater Treatment Division, because King County Wastewater Treatment Division processes about 50% of all the sewage in Washington state. They have about half the population. So that's a lot of material. That's a lot of fecal matter and other wastes, keeping in mind that sewage sludge is the end product of stormwater runoff, one of the most toxic substances in the state, as demonstrated clearly by NOAA, USGS, University of Washington, and others. So it is stormwater runoff, it is domestic sewage, it is industrial sewage and waste, and hospital waste as well. When you combine all of this and put it down any drain and it ends up in a wastewater treatment plant, we get back to the underlying premise here that wastewater treatment plants actually do not treat wastewater. They are designed to separate water from solids, return the water to the environment. But where's the statement about what do you do with the solids? And that is, they have to dispose of it in the most convenient way. That means put it on our land, put it in our forests, on our food crops. Yakima Valley is one bad example, grows about 80% of the hops used in all the beer in the United States and 60% of all the beer produced in the world out of Yakima. And all of that hops is buried in sewage sludge. Think about that. So when we ask the question, what's in it and what does it do of our agencies, and I sit and have these very serious meetings with them, they get quite angry because they've never done a chemical analysis. They never do a microbiological analysis. Worse yet, they've never done a toxicological evaluation. And keep in mind, I have the right and the credentials to ask these questions because in my pharmaceutical development work, I must do under US FDA requirements, toxicology and safety studies on all kinds of drugs that I develop. So if you look around the state, here's Douglas, Benton, Yakima counties. This is all piled up like this for subsequent distribution onto the land. If you want to know what something looks like yesterday, this is it. This is Cedar Hills Regional Landfill. Keep in mind that this is next door to the landfill where Cedar Grove Compost resides, and it's next door to that where Land Reclamation Company resides, which is adjacent to and bordering the Queen City Farms EPA Superfund sites, one of the original and most toxic Superfund sites. So after some really bad people chased them out of the forests and then out of the farms, what to do with 150,000 tons a year, they started dumping it right here in the Cedar Valley along the Cedar River. East Renton, not far from you guys. And when they then sprayed it over with grass seed to try and cover it up, and it rained, and it really rained in January, this is one of the rainiest areas of Washington State, you can see what happens. All that sewage sludge washes out with the grass and with the toxic soil under it into these rivulets, and it runs down into the Cedar River. And the Cedar River runs into Lake Washington, which runs into Puget Sound. And here are various views of that. In the lower right, you're looking at an algal mass. From the biologist's point of view, that is the problem of eutrophication, whereby these algae that thrive on all these sludge toxic chemicals and nutrients absolutely deplete the waters of oxygen. So how do salmon live in that? So I always dwell on cancer because it is one of the most serious outcomes of blatant toxic disposal in our environment. The proper slide would be 5 slides long, but like I say, I compressed them into one just to give you a sense of the numbers. I recently presented at a town hall meeting of our state senator and representatives, and I recently presented at King County Council, and they all got mad at me, and they started saying things in unison. So I could tell they had a meeting about it. They said, "Don't you know cancer is over? Don't you know, I know about 10 people who used to have cancer and it's over?" So when I show this kind of slide, they sit back and get very quiet because we are now living in an explosion of cancer worldwide, and most especially in the most developed countries such as ours, because we create more synthetic chemicals and plastics and fertilizers and pesticides and cleaners than anyone else, and they end up in our environment. And when you look at the causes of death, for example, you look at the colorful chart at the bottom, it shows that while the rest of the world experiences cardiac diseases, cardiovascular diseases as the primary cause of death, here in the US, we are experiencing an explosion of cancer, and it's primarily because of our exposure to toxic waste. Well, then King County Council members came back and said, well, that could only be a minor part of what causes cancer, so I had to lay this out for them. What causes cancer? I asked them. Oh, radiation and some viruses and some other things. Well, actually, they're a minor part. About 98+% of all cancers are caused by environmental contamination and pollution. And all of those environmental contaminants and pollutants I can find in toxic sewage sludge as produced right here in Washington State. So this chart tells us something, because the life expectancy increased from about 47 years of age to about 78. That's a big deal. But the next couple of lines tell the tale. 70% decline from cardiovascular disease. That's very good medicine, but only a 1% decline in deaths from cancer. One of the issues we're confronted with in this whole topic of cancer is that it used to be 30, 40, 50 years ago, if someone got cancer, they just went and died. But now we have so many methods of treating cancer patients that they last for years. It's typically not a happy life when you have suffered the adverse effects of radiation, surgery, and chemotherapy. And eventually they primarily die from cancer therapy itself or from infections resulting from therapy. So what have we done? People get cancer and we made their lives longer. They're not happy lives, but we now are able to put up charts that show how long and how successful we are. But we don't have any cures for cancer yet, which is why my new company is working so strongly on this cancer vaccine for one difficult cancer. If you get out of cancer and you look into infectious diseases, it's easy to imagine that every infection agent from from every infected person on Earth goes down a toilet, if nowhere else, including in medical centers and so on. And here's just what the WHO tells us is the priority list. And they're primarily antibiotic-resistant microorganisms, which is one of my specialty fields. So if you read that list and fell asleep, here's the similar list that comes from our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It's a very similar list, a little longer, and these are primarily antibiotic-resistant microbes. So then we shift to Washington State and King County, and on the left you'll see the critical list for testing. That's what should be tested with regard to infectious agents and sewage sludges. And then you look at the list on the right, which I label the wrong list, and there's nothing on that list on the right that even remotely matches what's on the left. King County and Washington State absolutely refuse to do an evaluation of two things: the infectious agents in sewage sludge and the antibiotic-resistant microbes in sewage sludge. We're now suffering worldwide from major serious problems with antibiotic resistance. They won't do it. So what is the functional alternative? I've been working with engineering firms, and we've narrowed down to Kiewit, which is, you probably know that, they're a major engineering firm who's willing to build a sludge-to-energy thermal decomposition plant for us if we can come up with $65 million. And the core technology in there actually comes from Finland, a company called Ototech that has offices in Coeur d'Alene. So it's a very simple fix. All that sewage sludge can go into a sludge-to-energy thermal decomposition plant and actually make a profit. The problem is that farmers now would have to pay more for fertilizer, commercial fertilizer and manures, because their sewage sludge would be taken away. So what do we want? More disease, more plants, less toxics? Those are decisions that have to be made. But we've calculated what the facilities would look like. I'd love to put 4 in Washington State. I've calculated we need 4. It's not my business. I'm not in the business of sludge to energy. But when you describe a problem and outline it carefully, you really are obligated to at least explore the functional alternatives to land disposal, and that is thermal decomposition. And the benefits are everything that's in sewage sludge at these extreme high temperatures, this is not incineration, by the way, get reduced to just basic chemical elements and metals. And that material has high value in and of itself because it can be used in part for fertilizers and also for construction materials such as concrete. It makes concrete waterproof, harder, last longer. So that's it. I just wanted to give you that overview. I believe, in essence, we are in a contest between public health and commerce. That's what it all reduces down to. So whether we're citizens or legislators, whether we're electeds or not, or scientists or university people or agency employees, we really have to explore our soul and discover what is more important. Is it human health or is it commerce? Is it the most convenient methods of toxic sewage sludge disposal? Or can we go to beneficial reuse, for example, through thermal decomposition?
We unmuted.
Anyway, thank you. 12:01, not bad, huh?
Not bad at all, Doc, thank you. Michelle, were you gonna add in as well?
No, I'm just here to observe.
Okay,
I've heard Dr. Honor speak many times.
okay.
It's-
Gary, go ahead, Gary.
Doctor, this is Gary Edwards.
Hi.
I just want to thank you for, well, you and I are probably in the demographic, we're not going to see a solution to this situation because neither one of us are spring chickens anymore.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for taking this on as a lifestyle project that and planting the seed that those that come after us are gonna at least be aware of what you've been able to point out through your expertise and study. And I really do believe that young people like Michelle and Commissioner Menser and other folks coming down the road,
Left me out.
as you make people aware of this, we're gonna come to some solution at some point. And we never would have got there, because I'm an optimist, I'm an eternal optimist. I feel we will get there in the not too distant future, but only because of efforts like yourself and others that have taken this battle on. And really what this whole thing boils down to, and I know my seatmates and others don't like to hear me say this very often, but I don't have a lot of trust in government. And exactly what you are explaining is one of the reasons why. Because here we are in a situation that we claim to be friends of the environment, and nobody is even interested in taking this type of serious situation on. So I just want to commend you for all of your hard work. You know, I've been to a couple of your presentations, and I'm a believer. We need to do this. We need to get it fixed. And I just again want to thank you very much for all your effort.
Oh, thank you for the comments.
Commissioner Menser, you got questions? Or
Yeah,
comments?
sure, I'll throw one out. So, I've been a commissioner for just over a year, and before that, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I knew nothing about biosolids, wastewater treatment, nothing. I mean, just literally nothing. And I've learned a lot in the last year about what we do in Thurston County and the state of Washington. And I've learned, I'm on the lot board as Commissioner Hutchings was before, which is our wastewater treatment plant. So I've learned a lot about what they do, and so I knew about the trucking. I've seen the biosolids falling from the thing into the truck, and it goes off to Eastern Washington, and how it's used for fertilizer. Are we different than other places in the country? Because now all I know about is Washington. Has any other state taken a different approach to this? Taken more attention to the concerns that you're worried about? Or is this kind of snow job, so to speak, if I put it that way, kind of across the country, just ubiquitous?
It's a global issue. In the EU, for example, one by one, countries are forbidding the land disposal of sewage sludge and even the landfilling of garbage. You go to Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, it's really changing before our very eyes because their waters, their groundwater, their rivers, their lakes, their aquifers underneath were terribly polluted and getting worse. It became a lifestyle. So they are working very hard to forbid it. In Australia, it's the same way. I work with people in Australia. Throughout the US, the situation varies with each kind of environment. You can imagine New York City. By the way, the director of wastewater treatment division for King County left and took a job in New York City. I think she got 3 times the salary for doing it. But anyway, it's a big job, and they forbid many years ago any dumping of sewage sludge and water on the land, so it all goes on trains, and the trains go west and then south. So the trains leave some sewage sludge in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and a lot of it was actually going all the way to Texas. Because, by the way, New York, and especially New York City, happens to be one of the most environmentally sensitive populations in the U.S., believe it or not. So they got rid of their sludge, and they do additional treatment of their wastewater effluent that goes into their bays and sounds and the ocean there. When you get to more primitive states like Alabama, Georgia, and by the way, I use that word only because I've been there so much, those primitive places, they love sewage. They actually have sewage trained and trucked in from other states. They can't wait to use it on all of their crops. It's a mystery to the rest of the world, but they do. After Katrina, when so many wastewater treatment plants were destroyed, I was hired on contract to go to New Orleans and to adjacent Mississippi to figure out what could be done with the number of wastewater treatment plants that just disappeared off the earth in Katrina. And it was a very simple answer. Nothing. They didn't treat it anyway. What's the difference? They were actually using everything that came out of their wastewater treatment plants to fertilize the grass at their dairies. And so that's what the cows were living on anyway. It was no different. It's very different no matter where you go. In California, for example, oh boy, sludge wars go on forever down there. And the citizens win and the environment wins, and they're very serious people. In Oregon is very interesting. We always think of it being so green and nice, but all you got to do is get on the train and go to Eugene, Oregon, and as you're looking out the windows along the river valleys, there's all the sewage sludge. So they think it's a commodity in Oregon. It's all over the world. It's all over the U.S. Many countries forbid its use for anything other than thermal decomposition and energy source anymore. What we have to do in Washington State is catch up. When people ask me, well, where do we rank in the U.S. among 50 states? I think with regard to environmental sensitivity, I think we're somewhere around 48. We're way down the list. We just don't take it seriously. And when people ask why, my response is typically that we are in large part an agricultural-based economy. And so the profit margins for the ag industry are revered here. And so when someone is selling the storyline that these are fertilizer replacements, when the farmer doesn't have to buy all that commercial fertilizer, the profit margins increase. And that's part of the driving factor. The other thing is, in King County, they've had really bad advice from outside consultants on how to treat wastewater. And in the Brightwater plant in Woodinville, as one example, it was going to cost $1.5 billion, and it cost $2.5 billion. And yesterday, under the cover of my wife as a hiking partner, we tracked yet additional wastewater effluent coming out of that monster plant right into a wetland in a park next to a daycare center as it flowed into the Sammamish River and into Lake Washington. I mean, who on earth would ever advise anybody to do that? You can't even go for a walk there. It stinks so bad. And what agency would think that was a good idea? No one can imagine. That's just one example. So it's a very long answer to your very short question, but throughout Washington State, sewage sludge is viewed as a commodity, as a fertilizer substitute. There are a couple of exceptions. Edmonds, Washington, if you ever get in the ferry line to take the Edmonds ferry, the bushes on your right are a clandestine wastewater treatment plant. It has its own incineration plant inside. There's no odor, there's no aroma, no noise, nothing to see, no smoke. All the sewage goes in, and what comes out is quite clean water that flows through a wetland where a lot of microbial action makes it cleaner. So they did a very good job. City of Spokane, as you know, they're one of the premier waste to energy locations on Earth. They used to have monster landfills that were poisoning all their aquifers. They built this giant solid waste to energy plant. I've been there, you go through it, and everything you go in one end, what comes out the other end is a pickup truck full of ash, no smoke, nothing. These technologies exist for solid waste and for sewage sludge and for wastewater effluents, but we're not quite there yet on being motivated to do it, because as human beings, we've come to adapt to the idea of neurological deficits being associated with aging rather than with toxic exposure. and we expect cancer to be a part of our life. In our $22 billion US GDP, 3 billion goes for healthcare, and 22 trillion GDP, 3 trillion go to healthcare, and 1 trillion of that, 1/3 of it, is the commerce surrounding cancer. We have to be very careful because we have federal agencies that now tell us that if cancer were cured tomorrow, the US economy would fail. So we're stuck in that dilemma as well. On the one hand, there's an enormous revenue source in cancer treatment and building a never-ending supply of cancer hospitals and treatment centers. And on the other hand, the cost to loss of life, loss of work, loss of tax revenue because of the disease of cancer is on the other side of the equation. And as a US government, we are remiss in making the perfect analysis cost-benefit relationship between having cancer and no cancer. I've been advocating for that analysis and it isn't done. I met with our state legislators last week about Hanford, and I apologize for laughing. I laughed with them as well, and I got to the solution of what are you going to do with the plutonium, the cesium, and the americium? What is it and the strontium, what are you going to do with it now that $1 trillion plus has been spent at Hanford? Well, their newest solution is they're going to put it in trucks and send it to Texas. So rather than curing the problem, they want to move the problem. And I said, you can't keep doing that. You have to have a solution. What is the difference from a US perspective of whether you're causing cancer and killing people in Texas versus Tri-Cities? You have to change that. And they just stare at me like I'm nuts. They want to keep moving the problem. We have to change the dynamic. And so what is my suggestion? I said, well, you have to do a very serious epidemiologic analysis coupled with a powerful mathematical/financial model to project and forecast the costs of getting rid of these toxic materials and therefore cancer and so on, as opposed to continuing on with this cancer industry. And they didn't realize their mics were still on, and the three of them got together and huddled, and they said, what is he talking about? An audience of about 120 got a great chuckle out of that. They didn't understand the value of forecasting epidemiologic, mathematical, and financial models to really understand what is the cost of their behavior to human beings and to society. That's why I continue to restate that I believe we're in a contest between public health and commerce. And that is what must be resolved by data, not by innuendo or ideas.
Is the,
Yeah, we
is,
got more questions, Doc, hold on.
just one quick follow-up, is that Spokane system that you were describing, is that the same as the thermal decomposition sludge to energy that you were describing as an alternative?
No, it isn't. It's actually more primitive and needs to be upgraded. The sludge to energy is a fluidized bed technology that's made in Finland, the core technology. And it uses very high heat, like 1800 degrees, and it reduces anything in toxic sewage sludge to just basic elements and clean air and heat for energy. The energy is for sale, the ash is for sale. The Spokane system was made a couple of decades ago, latest state of the art at the time, and it still comes under the category of mass burn. While I was there, people back in pickup trucks and they have a trailer and a boat and a motor in the back. That goes in there. Anything you can imagine goes in there, and everything gets chopped up, ground up, burned up at high temperature. And like I say, you get these pickup trucks of ash out the back and heat for energy, and they are an energy production company, and you don't even smell it when you're inside it. It's a remarkable experience. And those plants are being built throughout the EU very successfully, with many more in design and construction today. we have to catch up, not just as a state, but also as a country.
Okay, Doc, are the slides that you presented today available to send to us?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I don't need 100 slides, and I wouldn't be able to understand 100 slides, but the ones I saw today, I had to get up several times and read them. So if I was able to get the copy of what you presented today, that'd be very helpful.
Yeah.
And I've only been a commissioner for just over 3 years. How long have we been doing it this way with sludge?
Since the beginning of sludge.
Okay, that's what I figured the answer would be.
Yeah, since the beginning of wastewater treatment plants, everybody used to have an outhouse and it went down the hole and then you covered it up and moved the outhouse. But now we live in an era where the pharmaceutical industry and the chemical industries, especially big oil and big plastic, one and the same, produce more chemicals than we can even imagine. And the toxic evaluation of those chemicals is impossible. It's beyond human capability. So it all goes in our environment. And I left out slides about the ideas of macroplastics, microplastics, and nanoplastics. All this plastic breaks down into submicron particles you can't even see. And these toxic chemicals we're talking about chemically adhere to these plastics, and they are just dispersed in soil, water, air. They get into everything. And as they degrade in UV and oxygen, meaning outdoors.
Doctor?
Yes.
Dr. Gary Edwards here. Is there any chance, being as you bring up the plastic, I know we don't have enough time to cover everything, but could you just give us a little information about the compounding effect because of the magnification of surface area as the plastic breaks down and how that has a detrimental effect in the long run, real Reader's Digest version?
There are multiple effects.
I still have questions.
There are multiple effects that are biological as well as chemical. And of course, as you know, as a sphere gets smaller and smaller, or any particle gets smaller and smaller, the ratio of surface area to volume changes such that you get greatly expanded relative surface area. And these toxic chemicals bond to these particles, and they're easily then dispersed in the environment. In air, you can't even see them. Right now, all of us are seeing pollen on everything. Well, these are way smaller than pollen. You can't see it. So we breathe it in. So we're getting our dose of carcinogens simply by breathing. And it's uptaken by plants in the field, and they're in the plants, and it's in our waters. And water treatment facilities typically can't get these particles out. So they're in everything we eat and drink and experience in our environment. It's from plastic. It's from synthetic clothes. You know, it's one of the biggest sources of plastics out there. Every time you do the laundry, these plastics end up in the Columbia River or somewhere, just because that's where wastewater ends up. So it's a scourge, and these contribute to the cancer story and to the metabolic disorders and to the neurological disorders as well. And medicine, as hard as it may practice to come up with treatments and cures and patient management, knows very little about this chemistry. I mean, it'll be another 10 or 20 years before we see this as a great revelation in the practice of medicine. These are serious problems. What we're all trying to do is anticipate for the benefit of those who come after us. Because once this stuff is in the environment, getting it back out is a serious problem. And as it stands today, coronavirus or not, we're dwelling on commerce.
Okay, hey Doc, I've got a yes or no question, and then I've got one that will take a little bit, not time, but explaining. Is the suggestions for disposal of sludge, thermal decomposition and converting it into energy, is that the best practice? Is that the best suggestion we have to disposal?
Absolutely. Anywhere in the world you go, any scientists, engineers, people in the field, communities, in Europe, their governments, boy, that's where it is, because putting it in the environment is only bad. There are no good aspects. Even if,
Okay.
when I'm over in Douglas County, it's an interesting experience walking the wheat fields with the farmers. They all carry guns and they all want to kill me, but we go out on these tour expeditions and they pull up the wheat plants and show me the roots and how healthy they are. And I have to agree. Sewage sludge makes wheat grow better. But luckily, we don't eat it. All that stuff is shipped to Africa and Asia and Latin
Yeah.
America. So we're getting rid of our garbage by feeding it to the rest of the world. That's the part that I
And
don't.
that's kind of my next question, the supply chain. You talk about public health versus commerce, but it's also government versus best or the easiest practice and government versus science. And so you talked about the profit margins, and I know some of this might sound very basic, but who is making money on this and at whose expense? And is there any return or kickback?
Oh, this, you're talking about $1 billion industry in Washington state. And if you think only about the 6,800 double dump trucks going back and forth over the Cascades from King County, that's just one part of it. Once it gets over there, then there are these companies known as beneficial use facilities, BUFs, contracted for millions from King County, who take the sludge, and then they have these giant sludge spreaders, and they go around to all the farmers, and the farmers pay them to get sludge on their fields after King County paid them to take the sludge. So they're getting paid in both directions. Excuse me. So you have the haulers. In Mount Vernon, there's a company called Skagit Transfer. They're the ones who own all these trucks. They're the biggest contractor for King County. It's millions and millions a year to haul all this stuff. So just think about how many trucks are going from Mount Vernon to Seattle, over the I-90, all through the Yakima Valley, Douglas County, Chelan County, Grant County, oh my gosh, Benton County. The cost of the trucks and the fuel and the drivers and the accidents, they're forever dumping these things. So you've got spreaders, you have haulers, and then you have the farmers themselves. So there's a lot of commerce around it, a lot of cash trading hands around this business.
So this, you talk about the wheat, so the sludge has stuff in it that makes the wheat grow better, but you're saying that something intrinsic about the wheat is like somehow the chemicals get into the food or into the plant in a way that's harmful?
Wheat is not the right example for that, because wheat is wheat and it just does not bioassimilate and bioaccumulate the chemicals quite that much. But other crops like veggie crops and fruits and vegetables and so on, orchard crops, a lot of them actually bioassimilate, mean they take it up out of the soil, and they bioaccumulate, means they precipitate these toxics in the leaves and fruits and berries and other things. And it's plant by plant, it's a different situation.
Oh, perfect, thank you. That's interesting.
All right.
Richard, could you just mention some of the cost benefits of thermal decomposition and what they're doing in Zurich, and also that huge fort that they built in Hanover with the what's left from the thermal decomposition?
Yeah, in no more than 3 minutes, if you please, if you can.
1 minute. Yeah. Anyway, there are great benefits to thermal decomposition, because the key product of thermal decomposition is actually heat. And the heat is used to generate electricity, not only to run itself, but to provide electrical energy to surrounding neighborhoods and towns. It depends on the size. You get the wattage output as a function of size. But the ash material is very useful in construction materials, and also you can mine it for phosphate. There's a phosphate mineral called struvite. The city of Tacoma, for example, extracts the struvite from sludge because the world is running out of phosphate. Phosphate from sludges is a very valuable commodity.
Doctor, by any chance, just so we make sure of this, I understand we can utilize any of your photos or any of the information?
Oh, sure.
Reprint it, such?
Yes, of course.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good, thank you for that. Well, anything further? Do you have anything?
Oh, I have a lot, but we don't have enough time as
No.
normal, but thank you so much, Doctor, for.
Doctor, thank you, and thank you, Michelle, as well, for facilitating
You're
this.
welcome.
And Gary for
My
bringing it to
pleasure,
us.
anytime.
You're probably gonna hear from us again about maybe a presentation to our health department.
Well, that'd be good. I'm
Thank
up
you.
for that.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, bye-bye now.
Thank you,
Okay.
commissioners. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Michelle.
So we're gonna switch to those cameras and you can announce the moving into an executive session, please.
Okay.
Let us know when you're ready. Fine?
You're good. We're switched.
Now, this says 15th, but it's the 16th.
Yep, sorry.
Okay, that's all right, just want to make sure we have the same RCW. Are we on?
Yep.
Oh, we're going, okay. So, welcome, we're going into an executive session now. For how long, Brenda, you reckon? 30 minutes? This is pursuant to RCW 42.30.110 subsection 1 subsection I to discuss with legal counsel representing the agency litigation or potential litigation, the stay-at-home order, and commissioner actions may follow. So we'll be cutting the feed because we're going into an executive session and then we'll be back right afterwards. Thank you.